The morning light cut through the Serbian sky like broken glass. Eleanor Brooks sat in the back of an armored SUV, watching her father's sedan roll through the narrow streets of Belgrade. The motorcade moved with the practiced precision of diplomatic routine. 3 vehicles in formation, security protocols observed to the letter. She was 21 years old, still young enough to believe that power and position could shield you from the world's ugliest truths. Her father, Ambassador Richard Brooks, rode 2 car lengths ahead. Through the tinted bulletproof glass, Ellie could see the back of his silver hair, the familiar slope of his shoulders as he reviewed documents in his lap. He had been doing this for 30 years, representing American interests in places where interests had teeth and drew blood. The radio crackled, her father's voice, warm and steady as always. "Ellie, you listening?" She pressed the button on her headset. "I'm here, Dad. Remember what I taught you, language is power. But the real skill is listening to what people don't say." She smiled despite the early hour, despite the stone weight of the flak jacket pressing against her ribs. "I remember. Good girl. See you at the embassy in 20 minutes. Coffee's on me." Those were the last words her father ever spoke to her. The explosion came without warning, no countdown, no moment of recognition. 1 second the world was moving forward in orderly lines. The next it was fire and physics and the terrible mathematics of C4 plastic explosive. The sedan containing Ambassador Richard Brooks erupted into a ball of orange flame. The shockwave hit Ellie's vehicle like the fist of an angry god. Glass became diamonds in the air. Metal screamed as it twisted. The driver fought the wheel as the SUV fishtailed, tires shrieking against cobblestone. Time collapsed into slow-motion horror. Ellie watched her father's vehicle burn, watched black smoke pour into the morning sky, watched pieces of what had been a car, had been a life, scatter across the diplomatic district like confetti at a funeral. Her security detail was already moving. Hands grabbed her. Voices shouted commands in English and Serbian. Someone was screaming. It took her several seconds to realize the sound was coming from her own throat. They dragged her from the vehicle, pulled her away from the burning wreckage, away from the smell of cordite and melting rubber and things human beings were never meant to burn. But before they got her around the corner, before the smoke obscured everything, Ellie looked up. There was a man on a rooftop 3 buildings down. Dark suit, watching, not running, not panicking like everyone else in the street, just watching the flames with the cool assessment of a craftsman admiring his work. Sunlight caught something on his hand, a ring, large, ornate, an eagle grasping a sword. Then he turned and disappeared. The official report would call it a terrorist attack, Serbian nationalists retaliating for American foreign policy. The investigation would run for 6 months before quietly closing. No arrests, no justice. Just another name on the long list of diplomats who died in service to their country. But Ellie knew, terrorists don't use surgical C4 placements. They don't time detonations to catch a specific vehicle in a moving convoy. And they sure as hell don't wear Italian signet rings while they watch their handiwork. Someone wanted her father silenced. Someone with resources, with precision, with connections that reach from the Balkans into the machinery of American power. And that someone was still out there, breathing, smiling, wearing his eagle ring. The copper rose set on the corner of 47th and 10th like a bad tooth in a worse smile. Neon signs buzzed and flickered, casting red and blue ghosts across rain-slick pavement. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of stale beer, fried food, and the particular desperation that came from men drinking to forget things they could never quite escape. Eleanor Brooks, 26 years old now, 5 years deep into a life she'd never planned, wiped down table 4 with mechanical efficiency. The rag in her hand was gray with use. Her apron bore the archaeological record of 1,000 spilled drinks. Her hair, dark chestnut brown, pulled into a messy ponytail, had long ago given up any pretense of style. Invisibility was a skill she had mastered. The regulars knew her as Ellie, the quiet girl who never messed up an order, never asked questions, never drew attention. To them, she was furniture, background noise in the symphony of their small, hard lives. That was exactly the point. Tommy O'Brien sat at the bar nursing his 3rd whiskey of the evening. Dock worker, Irish to the bone, hands like hammers, and a face that had lost more bar fights than it had won. He raised his glass to Ellie as she passed. "Another round when you get a chance, sweetheart." "Coming up, Tommy." Officer Maria Rodriguez occupied her usual booth by the window. Beat cop from the local precinct, 45, and tired in ways that went deeper than just missing sleep. She drank coffee like it was medicine and complained about paperwork like it was original sin. Ellie, this coffee tastes like punishment. It's from this morning's pot. I'll make fresh. In the corner, old Joe sat alone with a beer that had gone warm an hour ago. Vietnam vet, rarely spoke. When he did, it was usually to ghosts only he could see. Ellie always made sure his glass stayed full and his corner stayed quiet. This was her world now, the Copper Rose, Hell's Kitchen. A studio apartment in Astoria, Queens, that cost more than it was worth and still left her 2 weeks behind on rent. A life lived in careful anonymity, in studied ordinariness. But in the closet of that studio apartment, behind winter coats she never wore, there was a go bag, $50,000 in cash, 3 fake passports, a 9mm Beretta with 2 spare magazines, a burner phone with exactly 5 numbers programmed into it. And every night before she went to sleep, Ellie checked the news from Europe, checked for names she recognized, checked for patterns in the noise, looking for the man with the eagle ring. Rick Donovan, the manager of the Copper Rose, emerged from the back office like a heart attack looking for a place to happen. 52 years old, 70 pounds overweight, greasy in ways that went beyond just his hair. He snapped his fingers at Ellie. Bennett, table 7 needs wiping. And look alive, we got VIP booking coming in, private party in the back booth. Ellie paused mid-step. VIP booking at the Copper Rose usually meant drug dealers who'd had a good week and wanted to flash their cash. Low-level criminals playing dress-up in a dive bar. But something about Rick's tone was different. There was nervousness there, real fear hiding behind bluster. When? She asked. 20 minutes. They want the whole back section cleared. And they specifically said to keep one server. That's you. Everyone else goes home early. Who are they? Rick's face went gray. The kind of people you don't ask questions about. Just pour their drinks, keep your mouth shut, and pray they tip. He disappeared back into his office. Ellie felt the old instincts kick in. The training her father's security detail had drilled into her during those long embassy years. Assess the situation, count the exits, identify potential threats. There were 3 ways out of the Copper Rose. Front door onto 47th Street, back door into the alley. Kitchen emergency exit that led to a fire escape. She marked them all in her mind. Whatever was coming, it was bigger than the usual Tuesday night crowd. The regulars sensed it too. Tommy O'Brien downed his whiskey faster than usual. Officer Rodriguez checked her watch and suddenly remembered she had an early shift. Old Joe just stared at his beer with the 1,000-yard gaze of a man who'd learned long ago when to make himself scarce. Within 15 minutes, the bar was empty. Just Ellie and Rick and the dying neon and the weight of something inevitable rolling toward them like thunder. At exactly 9 p.m., the front door of the Copper Rose opened. 4 men walked in. They moved with a precision that made the hair on Ellie's neck stand up. Not the swagger of street thugs or the nervous energy of small-time criminals. This was something else, something colder. They moved like soldiers, like predators, like men who understood violence as a language and spoke it fluently. 3 of them fanned out, scanning the room with professional efficiency, checking corners, marking exits, hands hovering near jacket bulges that could only be weapons. The 4th man walked straight to the back booth. Dante Moretti was 6'2" and built like a question. God asked about what happened when you combined Italian genes with American ruthlessness. Dark hair swept back from a face that belonged on Roman coins. Hazel eyes that missed nothing. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, silver against tan skin. The kind of mark that came from a knife fight in your youth and stayed with you as a reminder. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than Ellie made in 6 months. It fit him perfectly. Probably custom tailored. Probably by someone who understood that clothes on a man like this weren't fashion, they were armor. Ellie recognized him immediately. 6 months ago, his face had been everywhere. The racketeering trial, federal prosecutors trying to take down the Moretti crime family, 18 witnesses, 11 of them in protective custody, 3 months of testimony. And at the end of it all, Dante Moretti walked out of that courthouse a free man. The newspapers called him the untouchable Don. Standing in the Copper Rose, watching his guards clear the room, Ellie believed it. One of the guards, a thick-necked man with a face like a clenched fist, pointed at Ellie. You out, now. She started toward the door. Leave her. Dante's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute authority, the kind of voice that didn't need to shout because it had never been disobeyed. The guard hesitated. Boss, we need privacy. Oh, someone needs to bring the drinks. She stays. Dante slid into the back booth without looking at Ellie. To him, she was furniture, a tool, irrelevant to whatever business was about to unfold. He had no idea he'd just made a mistake that would change everything. The guards finished clearing the bar. Tommy O'Brien practically ran for the door. Officer Rodriguez was already gone. Rick disappeared into his office and closed the door, making it clear he wanted no part of whatever was about to happen. Ellie retreated to the far end of the bar, her heart hammering against her ribs. Every instinct she had was screaming at her to run, to walk out the back door and keep walking, get on a bus to anywhere, change her name again, disappear into the great American nothing. But rent was 2 weeks overdue, and running would draw attention. The kind of attention she'd spent 5 years avoiding. So she stayed and waited. 10 minutes later, the second group arrived. They were different from Dante's crew. Where the Italians moved with controlled precision, these men moved with the casual brutality of winter. They wore expensive cologne that couldn't quite mask the smell of cigarette smoke and old violence. Their suits were designer but worn with the comfort of men who'd been rich long enough not to care about labels. Russian. The Brava had arrived. Leading them was a man who looked like he'd been carved from Siberian ice and taught to walk upright. Alexei Volkov, 42 years old, blonde hair going silver at the temples, blue eyes the color of a frozen lake, hands that had strangled men and broken bones and done things that kept federal prosecutors awake at night. The newspapers had nicknamed him the Alligator after 3 of his rivals turned up in the Florida Everglades, their bodies torn apart by reptiles. The official story was accident, bad luck, wrong place, wrong time. Ellie had read enough about Volkov to know there was no such thing as bad luck in his orbit, just cause and effect, action and consequence. He sat down across from Dante. For a moment, the two men simply looked at each other, apex predators sizing up the competition, calculating angles, measuring threat. Then Volkov smiled. It was the smile of a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. Between them sat a third man, smaller, nervous, sweating through a cheap gray suit despite the air conditioning. Bobby Russo, Dante's translator. Ellie could see his hands shaking as he pulled out a notepad. The atmosphere in the Copper Rose had shifted. What had been a dive bar was now something else. A negotiating table, a battlefield without bullets. Yet, Dante raised his hand without looking in Ellie's direction. The gesture was casual, absolute. Bottle of Macallan, 18-year, 4 glasses. Ellie moved on autopilot. The Copper Rose kept exactly 1 bottle of good scotch, locked in the safe behind the bar for the rare occasions when someone with money stumbled in. She retrieved it with shaking hands, poured 4 crystal tumblers, and arranged them on a tray. Then she walked toward the booth where the future was being negotiated in languages she'd spent 5 years pretending not to understand. As she approached, the conversation stopped. 4 sets of eyes tracked her movement. Dante's guards tensed, hands inside jackets. Volkov's men mirrored them, a choreography of potential violence. Ellie kept her eyes down, set the glasses on the table with practiced efficiency. Her hands didn't shake, couldn't shake. The daughter of Ambassador Richard Brooks had been trained better than that. Poise under pressure, grace under fire. Even when your father's murderer sat across a table drinking 18-year-old scotch. She turned to leave. Dante began speaking. I'm offering you access to Port Newark. 20% tax on every container you ship through. My people handle customs, security, logistics. You focus on supply. Clean, simple, profitable. Bobby Russo translated into Russian, but Ellie, pouring a glass of water at the bar with her back turned, heard the discrepancy immediately. Bobby's Russian was textbook, grammatically correct but stilted. He was speaking Moscow street slang to men from St. Petersburg. Missing nuances. Flattening inflection. Amateur hour. Volkov laughed. It was an ugly sound, wet and mean. He turned to his lieutenant, a thin man with a scar running from ear to jaw, and spoke in rapid Russian. The words cut through the smoky air like razor wire. Tell the American dog he's dreaming. We'll sign his papers tonight. Then we'll cut his throat in the parking lot and take his ports for free. Ellie's blood turned to ice water. Volkov turned back to Bobby, speaking slower now, enunciating carefully. Tell him we accept his generous offer. 20% is fair. We are honored to do business with him. Bobby Russo, relief flooding his sweating face, turned to Dante. Boss, he says he's honored. He accepts the 20%, says you're a generous man and he's happy to work with you. Dante's shoulders relaxed slightly. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a gold fountain pen. From his other pocket, a folded document. Contract. Pre-printed, spaces left blank for signatures and terms. He uncapped the pen with the smooth motion of a man who'd signed 1,000 deals. The tip hovered over the signature line. And Ellie realized three things in the space of a single heartbeat. First, if Dante signed that contract, he would be dead before midnight. Second, the Russians would kill everyone who'd witnessed the negotiation. Every loose end tied off with bullets. Third, that meant her. The training her father's security detail had beaten into her during those long embassy years came flooding back. The lessons about reading rooms, about understanding that translation wasn't just vocabulary, it was intention, context, the space between words where truth lived. Her father's voice in her memory, as clear as the radio transmission 5 years ago. Language is power, Ellie, but the real skill is listening to what people don't say. She looked at Volkov, at the predatory smile, at the lieutenant's hand under the table, gripping what could only be a weapon, at Dante, seconds away from signing his own death warrant. Ellie made a choice. She grabbed the bottle of Macallan from the bar, walked back to the booth with quick, purposeful steps, and slammed the bottle down on the table with enough force to make the crystal glasses jump. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. Every eye snapped to her. Dante turned his head slowly, really looked at her for the first time. Saw not a waitress, not furniture, but an obstacle. A disruption in the carefully orchestrated machinery of his world. His eyes were the color of winter honey. Cold, calculating. "Excuse me?" His voice was dangerously soft. One of the guards, the thick-necked one, stepped forward. "Get the girl out of here before I—" "Don't sign it!" Ellie's voice was steady. 5 years of hiding, of being small and invisible and safe, evaporated in 3 words. The daughter of Ambassador Richard Brooks stood in that dive bar and made herself seen. "What did you just say?" Dante asked. Behind him, Tony Greco, his head of security, moved toward her. "Boss, let me handle this." "He's lying to you," Ellie pointed at Bobby Russo, "and your translator is incompetent." Bobby's face went purple. "You need to shut your mouth right now. I speak fluent Russian. I was top of my class at—" "The Russian didn't say he was honored." Ellie cut him off, her eyes locked on Dante. "He said, tell the American dog he's dreaming. He told his man that once you sign those papers, they're going to slit your throat in the parking lot and take your ports." Absolute silence. Dante didn't move, didn't look at Volkov, didn't look at Bobby, just stared at Ellie with the intensity of a man trying to solve an equation that suddenly had too many variables. "You speak Russian." It wasn't a question. "I speak 5 languages." Ellie's heart was trying to beat its way out of her chest, but her voice held steady. "And the word for honor doesn't sound anything like the word for dog." Volkov barked something in Russian, his face darkening. "What is she saying?" Without hesitation, without thinking, letting muscle memory and years of diplomatic training take over, Ellie responded in flawless Petersburg Russian, the refined dialect of the educated elite, not the street slang of Moscow criminals. "I'm telling him that you lack the honor to do business like a man, Alexei Volkov. So you resort to knives under tables and lies in translation. Coward tactics for a coward soul." Volkov's face went from red to purple. He stood up so fast his chair toppled backward. "Who are you?" Dante raised one hand. The motion was small, barely a gesture, but every guard in the room reacted instantly. Dante's men drew weapons. Volkov's men mirrored them. Within 2 seconds, 6 guns were pointed across the booth in a perfect Mexican standoff. Fingers on triggers, safeties off, death waiting for someone to blink. The Copper Rose, which had hosted 10,000 drunken arguments and 100 bar fights, had never seen anything like this. The neon beer signs buzzed and flickered. The jukebox in the corner played some forgotten 80s ballad. And in the center of it all, 2 criminal empires balanced on the knife edge of violence. Dante never looked at the guns. His eyes stayed on Ellie. Then he turned to Bobby Russo. "Is she telling the truth?" Bobby was hyperventilating. His notepad had fallen to the floor. Sweat ran down his temples in rivers. "Boss, they were speaking so fast. The dialect is really heavy. I thought I caught—" "Get out." "Boss, please, I can explain." "Get out, run, and if I ever see you again, I won't be this generous." Bobby Russo didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled out of the booth, nearly tripping over his own feet, and bolted for the door like salvation was on the other side. The guards stayed locked in their standoff. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Dante turned back to Ellie. "Sit down. I have tables to clean." It was a stupid thing to say, but fear and adrenaline were doing strange things to her brain. Dante pulled a Glock from his shoulder holster with the casual efficiency of a man who'd drawn weapons 1,000 times. He set it on the table next to the contract, next to the gold pen, next to the bottle of Macallan. I said, sit down, you're my translator now. Ellie looked at the gun, at Dante, at the Russians across the table, at the sick other weapons still pointed and ready. She slid into the booth where Bobby Russo had been sitting 30 seconds ago. The negotiation began again. For the next 40 minutes, Ellie translated, back and forth, Russian to English, English to Russian, filtering out the insults, smoothing the rough edges, finding the diplomatic language that allowed two predators to circle each other without drawing blood. Volkov wanted 30% in access to the Queen's warehouses. Dante countered with 25% in the Bronx Depot. They settled on 27%, split territories, and a monthly review of terms. No contract was signed, the trust was gone, but an understanding had been reached. When it was over, when hands were shaken with all the warmth of boxers touching gloves before a fight, Volkov stood, buttoned his jacket, looked at Ellie with something that might have been respect in a different man, but in him looked more like hunger. You are wasted pouring drinks, girl. He said it in Russian. Ellie answered in the same language. And you are wasted killing rivals when you could build an empire. Volkov laughed, actually laughed. Then he and his men walked out of the Copper Rose, back into the New York night where they belonged. The door closed. The guns disappeared back into holsters. And Ellie was alone with Dante Moretti and his crew. Dante poured himself a glass of Macallan, drank it in one long swallow, set the glass down with careful precision. Then he turned to her. Who are you? Just a waitress. No, he stood up, and Ellie was reminded exactly how large he was, how much space he took up, how the air around him seemed to compress under the weight of his presence. You just saved my life. You heard details of a multi-million-dollar criminal conspiracy. You speak Russian like you were born in St. Petersburg. I have a good ear for languages. Bullshit. Dante stepped closer. I've employed translators who couldn't do what you just did. Who are you? Tony Greco appeared at Dante's shoulder. Boss, what do you want to do with her? Dante studied Ellie like she was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve, like she was a playing card that had appeared in his hand from a deck he thought he knew. Grab her coat, he said finally. Excuse me? Ellie took a step back. You're not safe here. Volkov knows your face now. You embarrassed him in front of his men, made him look weak. If I leave you here, you'll be dead by morning. That's my problem. Dante reached out and touched her chin, tilted her face up so she had to meet his eyes. His hand was warm, calloused, surprisingly gentle. It's my problem now, he said quietly. You're coming with me. Before Ellie could protest, Tony Greco was holding her jacket. Marco Valle, another of the guards, had checked the street outside. The decision had been made. She was being removed, extracted, saved or kidnapped, depending on how you looked at it. 5 years of hiding, 5 years of being invisible, 5 years of running from the people who killed her father. All of it undone in 40 minutes because she couldn't watch a man walk into a trap without saying something. Because despite everything, despite the fear and the hiding and the dive bars and the fake names, Eleanor Brooks was still her father's daughter. And her father had taught her that language was power. But the real skill was knowing when to speak. The armored Escalade smelled like leather and gun oil and expensive cologne. Ellie sat in the back seat, wedged between Dante and the window, her cheap jacket clutched to her chest like armor. Outside, the city lights blurred past, Manhattan giving way to the expressway giving way to Long Island. Miles disappearing under wheels while Ellie's mind raced through possibilities. They were taking her somewhere. A safe house, Dante had said, until he figured out what to do with her. What did that mean? Did the Moretti family disappear problems the way the Bratva did? She'd heard the stories. Everyone had. Bodies in the East River, unmarked graves in the Pine Barrens. People who asked too many questions or saw too much suddenly deciding to relocate to other cities, other lives, or simply ceasing to exist at all. Where are we going? Her voice sounded small in the confined space. Dante didn't look up from his phone. He was typing rapidly, probably coordinating with people about the mess she'd just created. Somewhere safe until I figure out what to do with you. I can't just disappear. I have responsibilities. A life. Now he did look at her, one eyebrow raised. A life? You mean that studio apartment in Astoria where you're 2 weeks behind on rent? The bar job that pays minimum wage plus tips you split with a manager who skims 20%? That life? Ellie's blood went cold. How do you... I know a lot of things. Dante went back to his phone. And I'm about to know a lot more, starting with who you really are. They drove for 45 minutes, long enough for Ellie to realize they'd left the city completely. Long enough for the houses to get bigger, the lots to spread out, the fences to get higher, and the gates to get more elaborate. Old money country, where the truly wealthy went to pretend they weren't afraid of the city they'd made their fortunes in. The Escalade turned through iron gates that opened automatically, rolled up a gravel drive lined with old growth trees, stopped in front of a house that looked like someone had taken a European villa and transplanted it to Long Island. Marble, columns, perfectly manicured grounds even in October. Not a house, an estate, a fortress dressed up as elegance. Dante got out. Ellie stayed in the vehicle until Tony Greco opened her door. It wasn't a request. Inside, the foyer was bigger than her entire apartment. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, art on the walls that looked like it belonged in museums. Everything was beautiful and cold and clearly meant to impress. An older man appeared from a side hallway, 60, maybe 65, British accent clinging to his vowels despite what must have been decades in America. White hair, ramrod straight posture, the kind of bearing that suggested military background, special forces, the sort of training that stayed with you forever. "Mr. Moretti," he said, "I wasn't expecting you this evening." "Change of plans, James. We have a guest. Set up the blue room. Get her whatever she needs. Clothes, toiletries, food." James glanced at Ellie's stained apron, her cheap shoes, her general air of not belonging in a place like this. "Of course, sir. What should I do with her current attire?" "Burn it." Ellie bristled. "This uniform costs $15. I'll reimburse you." Dante started walking toward what looked like a study or office. Heavy wooden doors, the kind of room where serious business happened. Ellie called after him. "Wait." He stopped, turned. "Why?" she asked. "Why didn't you just kill me? It would have been easier, simpler, one less witness." Dante looked at her for a long moment, really looked at her. Not the way he'd looked at her in the bar, when she was furniture. Not the way he'd looked at her during the negotiation when she was a useful tool. This was different. This was assessment, calculation, curiosity. "Volkov was right," he said finally. "You were wasted pouring drinks. I need a translator. My last one just resigned." "I didn't apply for the job." Something that might have been a smile touched the corner of Dante's mouth. It didn't reach his eyes. "In my world, you don't apply. You're chosen." He disappeared into the study and closed the door. James the butler touched Ellie's elbow gently. "This way, miss. Let's get you settled." Ellie followed him up a grand staircase that probably cost more than everything she had owned in her entire life, down a hallway lined with more expensive art, to a door that opened onto what he called the blue room. It was a suite, not just a bedroom, but an entire living space. King-sized bed, sitting area, bathroom that looked like a luxury hotel. Windows overlooking grounds that stretched into darkness. "I'll bring you some clothing options shortly," James said. "In the meantime, please make yourself comfortable. If you need anything, there's a phone by the bed. Dial 9. He left, closing the door softly behind him. Ellie stood in the center of the blue room and tried to process what had just happened to her life. 6 hours ago, she'd been wiping down tables at the Copper Rose. Now she was standing in a mansion on Long Island, essentially prisoner of the Moretti crime family, because she'd saved a mafia boss from a Russian assassination attempt. She walked to the window, looked out at the grounds. Even in the dark, she could see the security. Men with dogs patrolling the perimeter, cameras on the corners of the house, lights on motion sensors. This wasn't just a home, it was a compound. She tried the door handle, locked from the outside. Of course it was. Ellie sat on the edge of the bed and put her head in her hands. She'd broken her cover, exposed herself, spoken perfect diplomatic Russian in front of people who would absolutely report that information to anyone who cared to ask. And somewhere in Europe, someone might hear about it. Someone who wore an eagle ring and remembered Belgrade. Someone who'd spent 5 years thinking Eleanor Brooks had died in that explosion, or disappeared into witness protection, or simply given up. Now they'd know she was alive, and they'd come looking. She should run. Tonight. Pick the lock on the door, find a way past the security, get to the road and hitchhike back to the city. Grab her go-bag and catch a bus to anywhere. Phoenix, Seattle, some small town in Montana where she could disappear again. But even as she thought it, she knew it was too late. She'd been seen. Not just by Volkov and his Russians, but by Dante's entire crew, by whoever Dante reported to, by whatever network of information and intelligence the Moretti family operated. She was in the system now, visible, exposed. And if she ran, it would only make her more interesting, More worth investigating. No, she had to play this out. Had to convince Dante Moretti that she was exactly what she appeared to be. A waitress with an unusual education. Nothing more. No threat, no conspiracy. Just a girl who happened to speak Russian. The lock on the door clicked. Ellie's head snapped up. The door opened, but it wasn't James with clothing options. It wasn't Dante coming to interrogate her. It was a woman, late 20s, stunning, platinum blonde hair that fell in perfect waves, a dress that probably cost more than a used car and fit like it had been sewn onto her body, heels that added 3 inches to an already impressive height, and in her right hand held with casual competence, a Beretta 92 FS with a suppressor screwed onto the barrel. She stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. Her eyes were glassy, pupils pinpoint small. Whatever she was on, it was making her dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with the gun. "So," she said, her voice honey and poison mixed together, "you're the new translator." Ellie stood slowly, hands visible, non-threatening. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." The woman laughed. It was not a sane sound. "Dante doesn't bring translators home to the estate. He brings mistresses, flavors of the month. And I don't like sharing." She raised the gun, pointed it at Ellie's chest, and smiled. Eleanor Brooks stared down the barrel of a suppressed Beretta and felt time slow to a crawl. The woman holding the gun was high. That much was obvious. Her pupils were pinpoints despite the dim lighting. Her jaw worked back and forth with the telltale grind of cocaine or amphetamines. Sweat beaded on her upper lip despite the cool air conditioning. Dangerous, unpredictable, operating on a cocktail of chemicals and jealousy, and whatever twisted logic had convinced her that murder was a reasonable response to perceived romantic competition. Ellie raised her hands slowly, palms out. Non-threatening, submissive, playing the role of terrified waitress. But her mind was calculating distances, angles, timing. The woman was 3 feet away, close enough that the suppressor wouldn't matter. The slide action on the Beretta would still make noise. Enough noise that the guards patrolling outside would hear it. "I think you have the wrong idea," Ellie said, keeping her voice calm, steady. "I work at a dive bar. I smell like French fries. You're beautiful. There's no competition here." The woman's face twisted. "You think I'm stupid?" Pretty in a mousy, tragic way. That's what Dante likes. Broken things he can fix. Projects. I've seen it before. She stepped closer, the gun barrel now inches from Ellie's chest. Fatal mistake. Ellie had learned hand-to-hand combat from Israeli instructors her father had hired during their posting in Tel Aviv. Krav Maga, the martial art developed for street fighting and survival. No tournaments, no honor, just brutal efficiency. Rule 1, Mama, never let an armed opponent close the distance. But the woman was high and rage made people stupid, and now she was close enough that the gun became a liability instead of an advantage. "Say goodbye, Mouse," the woman whispered. Ellie moved. Her left hand shot up and batted the gun barrel to the side, away from her body. Simultaneously, her right hand clamped onto the woman's wrist and twisted violently downward, using the attacker's own grip against her. The sickening crack of carpal bones snapping echoed in the blue room. The woman screamed, the gun clattered to the floor. But Ellie wasn't done. Couldn't be done. In a fight, you commit completely or you die halfway. She swept the woman's legs out from under her with a low kick that any street fighter would recognize. The woman went down hard, her head missing the corner of the marble nightstand by inches. Before she could recover, before she could think about scrambling for the dropped weapon, Ellie was on top of her, knee pinning the woman's good arm to the carpet, forearm across the throat. Not enough pressure to kill, just enough to terrify. The woman thrashed, gasping, eyes wide with the sudden realization that she'd brought a gun to a knife fight and still somehow ended up on the losing end. The door exploded inward. Dante stood in the doorway, a Glock 19 in a two-handed grip, eyes scanning for threats with the muscle memory of a man who'd cleared rooms before. Behind him, Tony Greco held a shotgun. James Barrett, the butler, appeared with a compact pistol that suggested his British military background had been considerably more intense than serving tea. They took in the scene, the dropped Beretta, the woman pinned to the floor, the waitress holding her down with the cold competence of a trained operative. Dante lowered his weapon slowly. "Jessica," he said. His voice was flat, empty of emotion in a way that was somehow more frightening than anger would have been. The woman, Jessica, started sobbing. "Dante, please. She attacked me. I came to talk and she went crazy." "She came in with a gun," Ellie said, not moving from her position. "Suppressed Beretta. It's under the bed." Tony moved to check, pulled the weapon out, examined it, nodded confirmation to Dante. Loaded, round in the chamber. Dante holstered his own weapon, straightened his jacket, looked at Jessica with the kind of disappointed assessment usually reserved for failed business ventures. How did you get past security? I still have the gate code from when we were took. I just wanted to talk to you, to explain. But then I saw her and I just thought, get her out of here, Dante said to Tony. Put her on a plane, Miami, Atlanta, somewhere that's not New York. If she ever comes back to this state, if I ever hear her name again, she disappears. Permanently. Make sure she understands. Dante, no, please, I love you. Tony grabbed Jessica's uninjured arm and hauled her to her feet. She was still sobbing, mascara running down her face, the high crashing into reality with sledgehammer force. Marco appeared to help. Between them, they dragged Jessica out of the room. Her protest faded down the hallway. A door slammed, then silence. James discreetly withdrew, closing the door behind him. Dante and Ellie were alone. She stood up slowly, tightened the belt on the silk robe James had provided earlier. Her hands wanted to shake, but she wouldn't let them. Couldn't show weakness now. Dante walked to the bed, sat on the edge, looked at her with eyes that missed absolutely nothing. You disarmed her. She was high, made it easier. Luck is a coin toss, Dante said quietly. Disarming an armed assailant, controlling them without lethal force, maintaining situational awareness while under direct threat. That's not luck. That's training. Expensive training. Ellie said nothing. So let's try this again. Dante leaned back on his hands, the picture of casual threat. Who are you, Eleanor Brooks? The use of her full name made her stomach drop. He'd already started digging. My father was protective. He made me take self-defense classes when I was young. Dante actually laughed, short, dry, humorless. I employ former Tier 1 operators, Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, men who've killed people in more countries than you've probably visited, and most of them couldn't have taken Jessica down that cleanly. He stood, walked toward her, invaded her personal space in a way that made her aware of exactly how much larger he was. You move like a ghost. You speak Russian like you were educated in St. Petersburg. You handle threats like you've been in life or death situations before. So I'm going to ask you one more time, and I want the truth. His hand came up, touched her chin, tilted her face up so she had to meet his eyes. Are you FBI, CIA, some kind of federal plant sent to get close to me? Ellie held his gaze. Let him see the truth there. I'm not working for anyone. I'm running from everyone. Silence stretched between them. Dante searched her face, looking for the leitmotif, the crack, the tell that would expose deception. He must have found something convincing, because he stepped back, gave her space to breathe. Okay, he said finally. Okay, tomorrow we have work. French delegation wants to discuss moving product through my shipping routes. Can't do it wearing a bathrobe. He walked to the door, paused with his hand on the handle. Get some sleep. And Ellie, next time someone tries to kill you under my roof, just yell. Saves time. Then he was gone. Ellie stood in the blue room, adrenaline finally crashing, and allowed herself exactly 30 seconds of shaking. Of fear and recognition, and the terrible knowledge that she'd just exposed capabilities she'd spent 5 years hiding. Then she locked the fear away, went to the bathroom, splashed cold water on her face. In the mirror, she looked like her old self, the girl who'd lived in embassy compounds, who'd learned 5 languages by the time she was 20, who'd been groomed for diplomatic service in her father's footsteps. That girl was supposed to be dead, buried under 5 years of dive bars and fake names and studied mediocrity. But she was still there, under the surface, waiting. And now Dante Moretti was looking for her. In his study 3 floors below, Dante poured himself 3 fingers of bourbon and picked up his encrypted phone. Hit speed dial. Tony Greco answered on the first ring. Boss, I need a full background check on Eleanor Brooks. Everything. Birth records, school transcripts, family history, employment, social media, parking tickets. I want to know what she ate for breakfast 10 years ago. A pause. Boss, she did save your life tonight, which is exactly why I need to know who she is. Nobody has skills like that from a self-defense class at the YMCA. Find out where she got the training. How deep you want me to go. All the way down. And Tony, be discreet. If she is some kind of plant, I don't want to spook her before we know who sent her. Understood. Give me 48 hours. Dante hung up, swirled the bourbon in his glass, stared at the photo on his desk, himself at 22, fresh out of Columbia Business School, standing between his father Lorenzo and his godfather Frank Castellano. Both men were smiling. Lorenzo had his hand on Dante's shoulder, proud, fierce. Frank stood on the other side, that easy charm he was famous for radiating like warmth. That photo was 8 years old. Lorenzo was dead now. Cancer had taken him piece by piece over 18 months until there was nothing left but morphine and memories. Frank remained, the consigliere, the advisor, the man who'd helped Dante navigate the transition from legitimate businessman to the reality of what the Moretti family actually was. And now Dante had a waitress who spoke 5 languages and fought like a professional and had eyes that looked like they'd seen things that left scars. He didn't believe in coincidences, not in his world. Morning came too early. Ellie woke to sunlight streaming through windows she'd forgotten to cover. For a disorienting moment, she didn't know where she was. Then memory crashed back. The copper rose. The Russians, Jessica, and the gun. She was in the Moretti compound, essentially prisoner. There was a knock on the door. James entered carrying a breakfast tray and several garment bags. "Good morning, Miss Brooks. Mr. Moretti thought you might appreciate some wardrobe options for today's meeting." He laid the garment bags across a chair, unzipped them to reveal several outfits. But these weren't the cocktail dresses or revealing clothes she'd expected. These were professional, tailored pantsuits, conservative blouses, low heels that could be walked in or run in depending on circumstances. Clothes for a diplomat, not a mistress. "I expected something more," Ellie gestured vaguely. James allowed himself a small smile. Mr. Moretti was quite specific. He said, and I quote, "Dress her like a diplomat, not an escort." These were his exact words. Something in Ellie's chest loosened slightly. Whoever Dante Moretti was, whatever he did, he was treating her with a certain kind of respect, seeing her as more than just decoration. That was something, she showered, dressed in a charcoal pantsuit that fit perfectly, despite James having no measurements. Either he was exceptional at estimation, or Dante had resources that could procure tailored clothing overnight. Both were probably true. When she came downstairs, Dante was waiting by an armored Escalade, phone pressed to his ear. He wore a navy suit that probably cost 5 figures. Diamond cufflinks caught the morning sun. He saw her, ended his call without saying goodbye. For a moment, he just looked at her, that same assessing gaze from last night. But something had shifted in it. Less suspicion, more curiosity. "Better," he said. "Now you look like someone who belongs at my table." In the vehicle heading back toward Manhattan, Dante briefed her. "We're meeting Santiago Reyes, Sinaloa cartel representative. They want to use my shipping routes to move cocaine up from Mexico. Meetings at Le Cirque, private room, high-end because Santiago thinks that matters." "What do you want from them?" Ellie asked. 35% of gross profit. They'll start at 15. We'll settle somewhere in the middle." "You speak Spanish?" "Enough to order food and insult someone's mother. Not enough for complex negotiation." "That's where you come in." He pulled out an iPad, showed her dossiers, photos, background information. Santiago Reyes, 45, third-generation cartel. Educated at UCLA, but chose the family business over legitimate enterprise. Known for calculated violence and business acumen. Preferred negotiation over bloodshed, but had no problem with bloodshed when negotiation failed. "He'll have a translator too," Dante said. "But Santiago's guy will be loyal to Santiago. I need someone in that room who's loyal to me." Ellie looked at him. "I'm not loyal to you. I barely know you. But you saved my life last night. And again this morning when you didn't kill Jessica and claim self-defense, that earns you a chance to prove loyalty. And if I don't want to be loyal," Dante's expression didn't change, "then you're a liability, and I don't keep liabilities." The threat hung in the air between them, unspoken but perfectly clear. Ellie turned to look out the window, watched New York scroll past, the city she'd hidden in for 5 years. The city that might become her grave if she made the wrong choices in the next few hours. "One question," she said. "Ask. The woman last night, Jessica, who was she to you?" "No one who matters anymore." "That's not an answer." Dante was quiet for a long moment, then someone who thought love meant possession, who couldn't understand that what we had was business, not forever. "Business?" "Her family runs nightclubs in Miami. We had an arrangement. She provided legitimate income streams for money laundering. I provided protection. We slept together. It was mutually beneficial until she decided it was supposed to be something more. And when you told her it wasn't, she started using cocaine, pills, whatever made the reality easier to handle. Last night was the inevitable conclusion. Ellie processed this, tried to reconcile the cold pragmatism with the man who'd ordered her dressed like a diplomat instead of a trophy. You're a complicated person, Dante Moretti. He almost smiled. You have no idea. Le Cirque occupied prime real estate in Midtown, the kind of restaurant where reservations required 6 months' notice and the sommelier's wine list read like a doctoral thesis. The private dining room in the back was elegant, understated, the kind of luxury that didn't need to announce itself. Santiago Reyes was already there when they arrived. He was shorter than his photos suggested, 5'8", maybe 160, but he carried himself with the confidence of a much larger man. Expensive suit, Rolex that could have purchased a house, cologne that probably cost more per ounce than decent scotch. 3 men flanked him, bodyguards trying to look like businessmen and failing. Their suits fit wrong over shoulder holsters. Their eyes scanned constantly, cataloging threats. Santiago stood when Dante entered, extended his hand. Senor Moretti, a pleasure. They shook. Performed the ritual dance of men sizing each other up while pretending civility. Santiago's eyes slid to Ellie. His expression flickered. Curiosity, assessment, a hint of dismissal. You bring a woman to discuss business? Dante pulled out a chair, gestured for Ellie to sit. She's not a woman, she's my voice. You'll show her the same respect you show me. Santiago's eyebrow raised, but he sat. Ellie leaned forward slightly. Spoke in flawless Castilian Spanish with just enough Mexican slang mixed in to show she understood the difference between classroom learning and street knowledge. Senor Reyes, Mr. Moretti wants you to understand that in the United States, intelligent women are considered assets, not decorations. He hopes this won't be a problem. Santiago blinked. Then he laughed. Genuine amusement. Tiene fuego. Me gusta. She has fire. I like it. The waiter brought menus, wine list. Began the elaborate performance of fine dining. Over the next hour, Ellie translated, back and forth. English to Spanish, Spanish to English. Dante wanted 35%. Santiago offered 20%. They argued, postured, tested each other's limits. Under the table, Dante's hand found Ellie's knee. Rested there. Not sexual. Grounding. A point of contact that said, we're in this together. She found herself translating not just words, but intent. Smoothing Santiago's rougher statements into diplomatic language. Making Dante's demands sound like reasonable business propositions instead of ultimatums. By the time dessert arrived, they were close to agreement. 28%. Territory divisions, monthly reviews of the arrangement. Santiago seemed pleased. Dante seemed satisfied. They ordered dessert wine, Chateau d'Yquem, because Santiago insisted on celebrating with the best. The sommelier poured 4 glasses with the reverence usually reserved for religious ceremonies. Santiago raised his glass. To new partnerships and mutual prosperity. Ellie was reaching for her glass when she heard it. Santiago had turned slightly to his left, speaking to his most trusted lieutenant. A man named Hector. Scarred face, dead eyes, the look of someone who'd killed enough people to stop counting. Santiago spoke in a dialect Ellie recognized immediately. Sinaloa mountain slang, the language of the rural cartels. Specific, regional. Not something you learned in universities. The poison axe in 10 minutes. Make sure the car is ready to dump the bodies. Ellie's hand froze. She looked at the wine glass, looked at Dante raising his to his lips, looked at Santiago's smile, and understood. This wasn't a celebration. It was an execution. Dante, her voice cut through the conversation. Sharp, urgent. Don't drink. Dante paused. The glass hovered an inch from his mouth. His eyes found hers. Why? He was still smiling at Santiago, playing the part, but his body had tensed. The wine, it's poisoned. He just told Hector they're dumping our bodies in 10 minutes. The table went silent. Santiago's smile faltered, just for a second, but Ellie saw it. Senor Moretti, is something wrong? Santiago asked in English. Dante set his glass down very carefully, very slowly. Then he moved. His hand shot across the table, grabbed the steak knife from Santiago's place setting, and drove it straight through Santiago's hand, pinning it to the mahogany table. Santiago's scream filled the private dining room. The door burst open. Tony Greco and Marco Valle entered with weapons drawn. They'd been waiting just outside, ready for exactly this kind of situation. Santiago's bodyguards reached for their guns. Don't! Tony's voice was calm, professional, the voice of a man who'd done this before and would do it again. His Glock was pointed at Hector's head. Hands on the table. Now, sir. They complied, slowly, hate radiating from their eyes but survival instinct winning out. Dante stood, straightened his jacket, looked down at Santiago, who was whimpering, clutching his impaled hand. You tried to poison me in my own city. No, it's a misunderstanding. The girl is lying. Dante picked up Santiago's wineglass, walked around the table to Hector. Drink it. Hector's face went gray. Senor Moretti, please. Drink it. The command in Dante's voice left no room for argument. Hector took the glass with shaking hands. Looked at Santiago, silently pleading. Santiago said nothing. Just stared at his pinned hand, blood pooling on expensive wood. Hector drank. 20 seconds later, he collapsed. Foam bubbled from his lips. His body convulsed once, twice, then went still. Cyanide. Fast-acting. Brutal. Effective. Dante looked at Santiago. Get him out of here. Leave him breathing. For now, I might have questions later about who ordered this. Tony and Marco moved efficiently, pulled the knife from Santiago's hand, zip-tied his wrists, dragged him toward a service exit where presumably a vehicle waited. The other bodyguards they left on their knees, hands on heads, contemplating the life choices that had led them to this moment. Dante turned to Ellie. She was standing by the wall, pale but composed, her training holding her together even as adrenaline screamed through her system. He walked over, stopped inches away, close enough that she could smell his cologne, see the gold flecks in his hazel eyes. You saved me again. Just doing my job. Your job is translating, not toxicology, not threat assessment. His hand came up, cupped her face. Who are you? Before Ellie could answer, before she could deflect or lie or maintain the fiction, Dante kissed her. It wasn't gentle, wasn't asking permission. It was adrenaline and survival and the raw acknowledgement of two people who just walked away from death. Ellie hesitated for exactly half a second. Then she kissed him back. Her hands fisted in his jacket. His arms went around her waist, pulling her against him. For a moment, the violence and the poisoned wine and the dead man on the floor all faded into background noise. There was just heat, connection, the electric charge of two people recognizing something in each other they hadn't expected to find. Dante broke the kiss, rested his forehead against hers, breathing hard. We need to leave now. This just became very complicated. Where are we going? My estate, somewhere I can think. Somewhere I can figure out what the hell just happened and why everyone suddenly wants me dead. In the Escalade heading back to Long Island, Dante made phone calls, gave orders. Set pieces moving on a chessboard Ellie couldn't fully see. When he finally hung up, he looked at her. Tony's running your background. Should have preliminary information by tonight. Ellie's stomach dropped. I told you, Please don't insult my intelligence by pretending to be something you're not. His voice wasn't angry, just tired. You speak 5 languages with native fluency. You disarm armed attackers. You recognize obscure regional dialects and identify poisons before they're consumed. That's not normal, Ellie. That's training. Serious, expensive, professional training. She said nothing. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to stay at my estate where I can protect you. Because if Santiago wanted me dead, others will too. And you've made yourself a target by association. And while Tony digs into your background, you're going to think very carefully about whether you want to keep lying to me. And if I don't want to tell you, Dante looked out the window, watched Long Island scroll past. Then I'll find out anyway, but it'll hurt our working relationship. And Ellie, I really hope we can have a working relationship because right now you're the only person in my life I'm reasonably certain isn't trying to kill me. Back at the estate, Dante disappeared into his study. Ellie went to her room, changed out of the pantsuit, sat on the bed and tried to calculate her next move. She could run, grab her things, slip past security somehow, disappear again. But Dante was right. She'd painted a target on herself. Santiago would want revenge. The Russians knew her face. And now the Moretti family was digging into her background. Running would only make her more interesting, more worth hunting. No, she had to see this through, had to convince Dante she was an asset, not a threat. Had to hope that when Tony Greco came back with his findings, they wouldn't include the parts about Belgrade and dead ambassadors and rings with eagles. There was a knock on the door. Come in. Tony Greco entered. He looked like he hadn't slept. Probably hadn't. Boss wants to see you. His study. Now. Ellie followed him downstairs, her heart hammering. This was it. Whatever Tony had found, Dante now knew. The study door was open. Dante sat behind a massive desk, a manila folder in front of him. When he looked up at her, his expression was unreadable. "Sit down, Eleanor." She sat. He opened the folder, pulled out documents, photos, news clippings. Eleanor Marie Brooks, born in Washington, D.C., daughter of Ambassador Richard Nathaniel Brooks, grew up in embassy compounds across 4 continents, educated by private tutors, fluent in 5 languages by age 20. He looked up. "Your father was killed in Belgrade 5 years ago. Car bomb. Official report called it terrorism. But the investigation was closed prematurely due to, quote, political considerations, unquote." Ellie's throat was dry. She couldn't speak. Dante pulled out another document. What the official report didn't include was that your father was investigating money laundering, European politicians connected to American organized crime. He'd identified a broker, someone who facilitated deals between both worlds. He pulled out a photocopy, handwritten, her father's journal. Your father called him the Eagle because of a signet ring he wore, an eagle grasping a sword. Silence filled the study like water filling a sinking ship. "Is that why you're here, Ellie? Revenge? Did you engineer this whole thing to get close to me?" "No," her voice came out barely a whisper. "I've been running, hiding. I just wanted to survive." "Then why save me? Why expose yourself?" Finally, she looked at him, let him see the truth. "Because I couldn't watch another man die when I had the power to stop it. I've seen enough death, lived with enough ghosts." Dante leaned back in his chair, processed this, calculated. "Your father's investigation. Did he identify the Eagle?" "No, he died before he could. But he left notes, clues. That's why you're still looking." It wasn't a question. Ellie nodded. Dante stood, walked to the window, looked out at his estate, his kingdom, his carefully constructed world. "There's something you should know," he said quietly. "The Moretti family has a consigliere, my godfather, Frank Castellano. He was my father's closest friend, helped me take over when cancer took Lorenzo." He turned back to face her. "Frank made 4 trips to Europe 5 years ago. Belgrade, Paris, Berlin, Moscow." Ellie's blood turned to ice. "And Frank Castellano wasn't born with that name. He was born Francesco Borghetti, changed it 30 years ago when he joined our family." Dante pulled something from his pocket, a photocopy of an old photograph, a younger Frank Castellano, smiling, shaking hands with a European politician. And on his hand, clear as day, a signet ring, an eagle grasping a sword. The room tilted. Ellie gripped the arms of her chair to keep from falling. "Your godfather killed my father." "It appears so," Dante said. His voice was hollow, empty. "And if that's true, then he's been using me, using my family, as a front for something bigger." He walked back to the desk, sat down. "So here's what we're going to do, Eleanor Brooks. We're going to find proof, real, undeniable proof. And then we're going to Paris, where Frank is attending an auction next week. And we're going to end this together." "Oh." Ellie looked at him, at this man she'd met less than 48 hours ago, this criminal who'd somehow become her ally. "Why would you help me?" Dante's smile was cold, dangerous, absolutely certain. "Because he tried to have me killed, twice. Santiago didn't act alone, neither did the Russians. Someone sent them. Someone who wants me out of the way so they can take over what my father built." He stood, offered his hand. "My enemy's enemy is my friend. And right now, Ellie, I think we have the same enemy." She looked at his hand, at the choice being offered. Then she took it and sealed both their fates. The private Gulf Stream climbed through thin clouds at 38,000 feet. Below, the Atlantic Ocean stretched like hammered steel, endless and indifferent to the small dramas of humans crossing its expanse. Eleanor Brooks sat in a leather captain's chair, tablet in her lap, reviewing dossiers on the men who would be at the Chateau de Malmaison auction. European politicians with expensive tastes and flexible morals. Arms dealers who'd grown rich selling death to anyone with money. Oligarchs who'd survived the fall of the Soviet Union by being more ruthless than their competitors. And somewhere among them, Frank Castellano, the Eagle, the man who'd killed her father. Across the cabin, Dante Moretti sat in silence. He'd been quiet since they left New York, lost in thoughts about betrayal and godfather figures who turned out to be something else entirely. His hands kept moving to his phone, then stopping, wanting to call Frank, to hear his voice, to find some evidence that Tony's investigation was wrong. But the evidence wasn't wrong. Bank transfers, travel records, meetings with Serbian war criminals in the months before Belgrade, Payments to Alexei Volkov and Santiago Reyes routed through shell corporations Frank controlled. The man who'd bounced Dante on his knee as a child, who taught him to tie a tie and fire a gun and navigate the complicated politics of organized crime. That man had been systematically trying to kill him for months, setting him up, weakening his position, waiting for the right moment to step in as the grieving advisor who could hold the family together after tragic loss. It was brilliant, really. Sociopathic, but brilliant. The intercom crackled, the pilot's voice tense in a way that made Ellie's combat instincts fire. "Mr. Moretti, we have a situation. Charles de Gaulle Air Traffic Control just flagged our tail number. They're saying Interpol wants us to land for inspection. They have agents waiting at the gate." Dante's head snapped up. "What?" "They claim it's routine. Random security check. But boss, this isn't random. They don't flag private jets like this unless someone made a call." Ellie was already moving. Years of her father's security briefings flooding back. The protocols for when diplomatic personnel were targeted. "It's not Interpol," she said, walking to the cockpit door. "Real Interpol doesn't make shows at airports. They operate quietly, coordinate with local authorities, execute warrants with minimal publicity." "Then who?" Dante asked. "Someone who wants us separated, vulnerable, probably the same someone who sent the Russians and the Mexicans." She looked at Dante. "This is exactly how they got my father. Routine security inspection. Separated him from his detail, planted the bomb during the search." Dante stood, walked to the rear of the cabin, opened an equipment locker. Inside were 2 parachute rigs. "Please tell me you know how to jump," Ellie said. "Learned in the Army, before I went into the family business." He pulled out the first rig, started checking the straps. "You?" "My father's security detail made me do basic airborne training, just in case." She paused. "But Dante, this is insane. We're at cruising altitude. It's freezing outside. We could die." "We'll definitely die if we land in Paris and walk into whatever trap Frank has waiting." He handed her a rig. "So we jump, land somewhere in rural France, find a way to the chateau that doesn't involve airports or manifests or anything Frank can track." He keyed the intercom. "How long until we're over land?" 12 minutes, boss. But if you're thinking what I think you're thinking, you need to depressurize gradually or you'll pass out. Do it. Get us as low as you safely can. We'll jump over the countryside." The pilot's response was colorful and multilingual, but ultimately obedient. Dante helped Ellie into her rig, checking every strap with the muscle memory of military training. His hands were steady, professional. But when he looked at her, really looked at her, she saw fear there. Not for himself, for her. "Stay close when we exit," he said quietly. "I'll deploy first. You follow. Keep your body rigid until the chute opens, then steer for open ground. Avoid trees, water, structures." I remember the training. Remembering and doing are different things. His hands lingered on her shoulders. "Ellie, if this goes wrong, it won't. But if it does, I need you to know something, what I said back at the estate, about you being the only person I trust. I meant it." The cabin pressure started dropping. The temperature plummeted. Ellie's ears popped painfully. Dante moved to the emergency exit, put his hand on the lever. "On 3, he said. The door opened. Wind screamed into the cabin like the voice of an angry god. The temperature dropped 40 degrees in seconds. Ellie's eyes watered from the cold and the speed and the terrible reality of what they were about to do. Below, she could see fields, dark patches that might be forests, scattered lights from villages. Somewhere down there was solid ground traveling at terminal velocity toward their faces. Dante grabbed her hand. "Trust me," he shouted over the wind. Then they jumped. Free fall was nothing like training. Training had been controlled, supervised, with instructors watching and safety protocols and the knowledge that if something went wrong, there were backups. This was chaos. Wind tearing at her clothes, cold burning her lungs, the ground rushing up with mathematical certainty. Ellie fought panic, kept her body straight, counted seconds the way her instructors had taught her. 1,000, 2,000, 3,000. Dante deployed his chute, the sudden jerk as physics took over. He rose above her, silhouetted against stars. 4,000, 5,000. Ellie pulled her ripcord. The parachute deployed with a bone-jarring snap. Straps dug into her shoulders and thighs hard enough to bruise. But she was floating now, not falling. The ground still approaching, but at a speed that might be survivable. She looked for Dante. Found him 50 yards to her left, steering toward what looked like an open field. She followed. The ground came up fast, faster than she expected despite the training. Her knees bent. She rolled the way she'd been taught, Pain exploded through her shoulder and hip as she hit frozen earth and tumbled. The parachute dragged her 20 feet before she managed to hit the release. Then silence. Ellie lay on her back, staring at stars, doing a mental inventory. Everything hurt, but nothing felt broken. She could move her fingers and toes, could breathe despite the impact having knocked the wind from her lungs. Alive. Improbably, impossibly alive. Footsteps crunched across frozen ground. Dante appeared above her, already free of his harness. Talk to me. Broken bones? Don't think so. Just bruised. Everywhere. He helped her sit up, started working the harness release with practiced efficiency. We need to move. Bury the chutes. Find shelter and transport. If air traffic control tracked our descent, police will be searching. They gathered the parachutes, found a depression in the field, and buried them under dead brush and dirt. Not perfect concealment, but good enough in darkness. Then they walked, 2 miles across frozen farmland, past sleeping villages and barking dogs and the quiet darkness of rural France. Ellie's shoulder screamed with every step. Dante limped slightly, favoring his left leg, but they walked. They found an abandoned barn as the first hints of dawn touched the eastern sky. Inside, under a tarp, sat a rusted Citroen truck that looked like it hadn't run since the 90s. Dante popped the hood, examined the engine with the flashlight from his phone. Think you can hotwire it? Ellie asked. I grew up in Brooklyn. Stealing cars was practically a rite of passage. 20 minutes later, the engine coughed to life. The heater blasted dust and the faint smell of mice. But warm air was warm air. Dante pulled the truck onto a secondary road, started driving toward Paris. Neither spoke for a long time. The adrenaline was fading, leaving exhaustion and pain and the weight of what they'd just survived. Finally, Ellie broke the silence. Your godfather tried to kill us. Yeah. How does that feel? Dante's hands tightened on the wheel, like everything I thought I knew about my life was a lie. More silence, fields and villages passing in the gray pre-dawn light. When we get to Paris, Ellie said quietly, when we confront him, what are you going to do? I don't know. Part of me wants to put a bullet in his head. Part of me wants answers. Why he did it. If there was ever anything real between us or if it was all calculation from the beginning. And the third part? Dante glanced at her. Wants to make him suffer the way he made me suffer. By taking everything from him. His reputation, his power, his allies. Leave him alive but completely destroyed. That's the part that scares me, Ellie said, because it means you're thinking like him. Maybe I learned from the best. They drove into Paris as the city woke, found Dante's emergency safe house in the Marais district, a third-floor apartment with reinforced doors and a weapons cache hidden behind a false wall. Dante went to shower. Ellie found the coffee maker and started a pot strong enough to strip paint. When Dante emerged dressed in fresh clothes from the safe house stock, he found Ellie at the table with the tablet, going through the decrypted files Tony had pulled from Frank's secured servers. Jesus, she breathed. What? Frank's network is bigger than we thought. He's not just connecting American crime families to European politicians. He's running a full-scale intelligence operation, selling secrets, brokering arms deals. He's got compromat on 12 government officials, payment records showing bribes to 3 senators, and evidence of weapons shipments to at least 4 conflict zones. She looked up at Dante. Your godfather isn't just a criminal. He's built a shadow intelligence agency, and he's been using your family's resources to do it. Dante sat down heavily, stared at the files like they were a cancer diagnosis. How long? Based on these records, at least 15 years, since before your father got sick. So Lorenzo knew? I don't think so. Frank was careful, kept it compartmentalized, used your legitimate shipping business to move weapons, your financial networks to launder money, but always with enough separation that it couldn't be traced back to the main family operations. Dante's phone buzzed. Text from Tony. Boss, I've been trying to reach you for 6 hours. Where the hell are you? Frank is asking questions. Says you were supposed to check in after landing in Paris. Dante typed back, tell him the flight was delayed, mechanical issues. We'll be there tonight. The Chateau auction was that evening. Black tie, invitation only. The kind of event where the world's worst people gathered to buy and sell things that should never be for sale. Art stolen from Holocaust victims. Antiquities looted from war zones. Access to politicians who'd sold their souls so many times they'd lost track of the original price. Ellie showered, changed into the emerald silk gown Dante had procured through channels that didn't ask questions. When she emerged, hair swept up in an elegant chignon, diamond necklace at her throat. Dante stopped mid-sentence in his phone call. Just stared. She raised an eyebrow. Problem? No, no problem. You just look like you could take over a small country. That's the idea. They drove to Chateau de Malmaison as evening fell. The building glowed against the darkening sky like a jewel or a trap, probably both. Luxury cars lined the circular drive, Bugattis and Rolls-Royces, and vehicles that cost more than most people made in a lifetime. Dante parked the stolen Maserati they'd acquired from the safe house garage, stepped out, offered his arm to Ellie. Ready? To confront the man who killed my father while surrounded by international criminals at a black market auction? Sure. What could go wrong? Despite everything, Dante almost smiled. They walked through the massive oak doors into a world of cultivated corruption. The main hall was filled with people who'd learned to hide monstrosity behind tailoring and manners, arms dealers in tuxedos, human traffickers in designer gowns, politicians who'd long ago traded public service for private profit. And on a balcony overlooking the floor, holding court like a king, stood Frank Castellano. He looked older than Dante remembered, silver hair perfectly styled, expensive suit, surrounded by sycophants and power brokers, laughing at something a Russian oligarch had said. On his right hand, clearly visible even from a distance, the signet ring glinted under chandelier light, an eagle grasping a sword. Ellie felt rage crystallize in her chest, cold and sharp and absolutely certain. That hand had signed her father's death warrant. Stick to the plan, Dante murmured. Don't let him see you bleed. They ascended the stairs. The crowd parted instinctively. Some recognized Dante. Some simply recognized power when it approached. Frank looked up. The wine glass slipped from his fingers, shattered on marble. The sound cut through conversation like a gunshot. His face drained of color. Dante, my God, the reports said your plane was forced down, that you'd been arrested. Reports of my arrest were greatly exaggerated, Uncle Frank. Dante's voice was smooth, controlled, giving nothing away. Mechanical trouble. We had to land in Lyon. Drove the rest of the way. Frank scrambled to his feet. His eyes darted around the room looking for exits, for allies, for anything that might explain why his carefully orchestrated trap had failed. I was worried. We all were. Just about to organize a search. How thoughtful. Dante gestured to Ellie. I don't think you've met my associate, Eleanor Brooks. She's been helping me with some translation work. Frank's eyes narrowed as he looked at Ellie. For a moment, something flickered in his expression. Recognition? Suspicion? Then it was gone, replaced by practiced charm. Miss Brooks, a pleasure. He started to extend his hand. Ellie didn't take it. Instead, she turned to the Russian oligarch seated at Frank's table. Dmitry Petrov, old money from the fall of the Soviet Union, currently under sanctions from 6 countries. She spoke in rapid, perfect Russian. Mr. Petrov, did Frank mention he promised the Newark shipping routes to 3 different buyers, including your competitors? Petrov's expression darkened. He looked at Frank. Is this true? She's lying, Frank said quickly. She's nobody, trying to cause trouble. Ellie didn't pause. She turned to the French Minister of Interior, seated beside Petrov. Switched to flawless Parisian French. Monsieur Beaumont, I believe you should know that Frank has been recording your meetings. He calls it insurance. The recordings detail your involvement in the Belgrade bombing 5 years ago. The minister stood so fast, his chair toppled. What did she say? To the German arms dealer at the end of the table, Ellie spoke perfect High German. Herr Richter, Frank sold your weapons shipments to both sides of 3 different conflicts. You've been funding your own competition. Richter's face turned purple. Frank raised his hands, panic cracking through his composure. This is insane. She's making things up. Guards, remove them. 4 security men moved forward. Dante pulled the tablet from his jacket, tossed it onto the table. It slid across the polished wood and stopped in front of Petrov. Every word she said is true. It's all there, every deal, every betrayal, every recording. Frank's been playing all of you against each other for years. Frank stared at the tablet, at the faces of the men he'd manipulated, at the walls closing in. You don't understand, he said, his voice breaking. I did this for the family, to modernize, to expand. We needed political connections, international reach. You did it for yourself, Dante said quietly. You killed Eleanor's father because he was investigating your network. You tried to kill me because I was in your way. You broke every code we have. Petrov picked up the tablet, started scrolling. His face grew darker with each swipe. You recorded our conversations? You sold my intelligence to the Germans? No, listen, the files are fake. She manufactured Beaumont's bodyguard grabbed Frank's arm, slammed him back into his chair. "I think Monsieur Castellano needs to explain himself," the minister said coldly. Dante turned to Ellie, offered his arm. "Shall we?" Frank's voice rose behind them. "Dante, please, I'm family. You can't leave me with them." Dante stopped, looked back at the man who'd taught him to shoot, to negotiate, to survive in a world that ate the weak. "In our world, Frank, death is mercy. I'm leaving you with the people you betrayed. They'll be more creative than I would." He and Ellie walked away, down the grand staircase, through the stunned crowd, out into the French night. Behind them, screaming started, then a muffled gunshot, then silence. Dante didn't look back. He walked to the Maserati, leaned against the hood, stared up at stars that didn't care about human dramas of betrayal and revenge. "He's dead," he said. Not a question. "Yes," Ellie confirmed. They stood in silence, processing, the violence behind them, the uncertain future ahead. Finally, Dante turned to her. "You were incredible. 3 languages. Dismantled his entire empire in under 5 minutes. I told you I speak the language of power. You're the most dangerous woman I've ever met." Ellie almost smiled. "Is that a compliment?" "It's a job offer." Dante stepped closer, eliminated the space between them. "I don't want a translator, Ellie. Don't want an employee. I want a partner. Someone who can stand beside me and tell me when I'm wrong in 5 different languages." His hand came up, touched her face. "I love you. Think I loved you from the moment you slammed that bottle down and saved my life." Ellie looked at him, really looked at him, saw past the criminal empire and the violence, saw the man who jumped out of an airplane to keep her safe, who turned on his godfather for her, who'd given her a choice instead of giving her orders. "The future's going to be complicated," she said. "I know. Dangerous. I know. We might not survive it. Then we die trying." He pulled her closer. "But Ellie, I'd rather die trying with you than play it safe alone." She grabbed his lapels, pulled him down, kissed him. This wasn't survival or adrenaline or fear. This was choice, commitment. 2 people deciding that the future was worth fighting for, even if the odds were terrible. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Ellie rested her forehead against his. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, let's burn it all down and build something better." Headlights approached, a black Mercedes. Ellie tensed, but Dante touched her arm. "Wait." The car stopped. A man stepped out. German, expensive suit, the arms dealer from Frank's table. Klaus Richter. He approached with his hands visible, non-threatening. "Mr. Moretti, Miss Brooks, I come in peace." "You have 30 seconds, Dante said. "Frank lied to me, cost me millions, damaged my reputation. But you exposed him honestly, with proof." Klaus pulled out a bottle of cognac, Remy Martin Louis XIII. "I propose partnership. I control European logistics. You control American distribution. We share intelligence, split profits fairly." He opened the bottle, took a long drink, waited 30 seconds to prove it wasn't poisoned, then offered it to Dante. Dante looked at Ellie. She assessed Klaus, watched his body language, his breathing, his micro-expressions. Finally, she nodded. Dante took the bottle, drank, passed it to Ellie. Klaus exhaled relief. "My people will contact yours. We negotiate properly." He got back in his Mercedes, paused before closing the door. "Mr. Moretti, your woman who speaks 5 languages? Worth more than 10 armies. You chose well." He drove away into the Paris night. Dante looked at Ellie. "Did we just accidentally build a European alliance?" "I think we did." They both started laughing. The sound echoed across the chateau grounds, releasing tension and fear and the terrible weight of what they'd just survived. 8 months later, Eleanor Brooks stood in a Manhattan penthouse conference room, looking out at the city that had almost killed her and somehow become home. She wore a tailored Armani suit, hair pulled back in a severe professional style, diamond earrings that cost more than her old apartment. Behind her, around a mahogany table, sat representatives from 5 criminal organizations: Russian Bratva, German Logistics Network, Irish Mob from Boston, Colombian Cartel, Mexican Sinaloa delegation. And at the back of the room, standing in shadows, Dante Moretti watched, not leading, observing. Because Ellie didn't need him to lead anymore. She turned from the window, addressed the room, switching languages as easily as breathing. "Gentlemen, we're here to establish new territorial agreements. The old ways of constant warfare benefit no one. Russian, we propose cooperation framework, respectful boundaries. Spanish, shared resources where it makes sense. German, and severe consequences for those who break the peace. She walked to the table, placed her hands on the polished wood. My father believed in fighting corruption through official channels. It got him killed. So I'm going to try something different. I'm going to make this world less violent from the inside by making it smarter, more profitable without bloodshed. One by one, they signed agreements, multi-language contracts that represented not peace exactly, but the absence of war, which in their world was the closest thing to victory. When it was done, when the last signature was placed, Ellie walked to where Dante stood. "How did I do?" she asked quietly. "You terrified them in the best possible way." "Good, fear and respect. That's the foundation." Tony Greco appeared at Dante's shoulder, whispered something Ellie couldn't hear. Dante smiled, shook his head. "Tony asked if I'm sure about giving you this much authority. And you said?" "That I'm not giving you anything. You took it. I'm just smart enough not to get in your way." Ellie looked out at the city, at the empire they were building together, something her father would have hated and maybe, secretly, understood. "My father used to say that language is power," she said. "That translation is the key to understanding different worlds." She turned back to Dante. "He was right. I translate more than words now. I translate intentions, loyalties, futures. They called me a waitress, then a translator. Now they call me other things." "What do you call yourself?" Ellie smiled, cold and certain and absolutely unafraid. "I call myself the voice that makes kings listen. And in 5 languages, I'm teaching them one very important word." "What word?" "Enough." She kissed him. Brief, professional, but with the promise of more later, when the empire was secure and the enemies were sleeping and they could afford to be just 2 people instead of power incarnate. Then Eleanor Brooks, daughter of a murdered ambassador, former waitress, current architect of an international criminal alliance, walked back to her empire, and the city lights below burned like stars.